Do you find yourself having frequent negative thoughts that you just cannot stop? And do you find that these are thoughts about yourself and the world around you, and is it really bringing your emotions down? Then in this video, I'm going to show you exactly how to stop negative thoughts with just 4 questions. So for those of you who are new to the channel, my name is Rumzi and I share my insights, knowledge and experience on how I overcame various mental health issues such as depersonalization, depression, anxiety, things like video game and internet addiction, as well as maladaptive daydreaming. And in my journey of recovery, what I've discovered is negative thinking seems to be just a part of all of those issues, as well as I'm sure other mental health issues. And it's something that we frequently experience quite often, especially these days. And so today what I wanted to share is exactly what you need to do to stop negative thoughts, because as we know, when we start having negative thoughts, they're very difficult to stop, and we can sometimes just spiral into further anxiety or depression if we were already experiencing that. So the first thing we need to understand is what is negative thinking, and also what is it not? So when I'm saying negative thinking, I'm saying when you start having thoughts that are saying just not very nice things and just horrible things about yourself or about the world or about your situation or about other people, for example. So an example of this could be you start noticing you're having thoughts about your life, and it's things like, oh, this is a terrible life, or I'm not a good person, or that person's horrible, that kind of stuff. Just things where, generally speaking, the overall tone of it is pretty negative. What I'm not referring to when I say negative thoughts are things like, oh look, there's a dangerous thing that might happen. Oh look, this thing in the future, there's a possibility that this could happen, be careful. Those thoughts are quite useful as long as they are not reoccurring and spiraling out of control, because in that case then they do become negative thoughts. So for example, if you have anxiety, then you'll know that you can get negative thinking which spirals out of control because it's about not feeling safe. Or for example, you start having thoughts that are imagining a future scenario that is catastrophic. So maybe it started out, for example, as something simple like, oh no, this thing could happen. That's a useful thought. But then if you kept going around and around in your mind about this situation, and you notice it's making you feel just worse and worse, then that has gone from a useful thought to a negative thought. So really that's what this video is about, what to do to prevent your mind from going over and over again about a particular situation in a negative way that's just going to make you feel worse and could be fueling potentially other mental health issues that you may have. And the core of the problem of negative thinking is, I guess there are 3 parts to this. So you've got firstly not being aware of the negative thinking, and quite a lot of us have this. I had this a long time ago where I couldn't understand why I was feeling so bad, and I kept thinking it was just because of life circumstances or situations. And then I started noticing my own thoughts really much more clearly than I ever realized I could. And I noticed they were just constantly negative, to the point where even just a simple walk down the street back in the past would turn into just, I would notice my mind constantly thinking of worst case scenarios or horrible things about people or myself. Like everything that I was experiencing would be interpreted in a negative way. So that just kept fueling the mental health issues I had at the time. So the key difference here was, once I became much more aware of what I was thinking and I was able to see it, it had already, just by being aware of those negative thoughts, much less control over me. And it was much more easy to see why I was feeling a certain way. So the first step is just to become aware of the negative thoughts that you're having. Whether they are negative or useful is good to also understand as well. That way you can start beginning to notice what triggers those negative thoughts. And then the second part to this, to the core issue of negative thinking, is being identified with these negative thoughts. So when I say identification, when I talk about being identified with your thoughts, what I'm really saying is, this is how I believe most people operate in terms of how they have a relationship with their mind and their thoughts. So we have these thoughts, and I was exactly the same. We have these thoughts going around our mind, And we totally believe that it's us. So we believe we are our mind, we believe that we are these thoughts coming through. And so because of this, we believe everything that they are saying. So even if these are negative thoughts that are completely not true, and there's literally no evidence to support what they're saying, like for example, a potential catastrophic situation in the future that your mind may keep going on about, then if we believe everything our mind is saying about the situation, that is identification. So that is one of the core issues with negative thinking, which is we end up identifying with the negative thinking and then assigning meanings about what that means about ourselves, about other people and the world around us. So once you've done the first step, which is becoming more aware and observing this negative thinking, becoming aware of what the triggers are for this negative thinking, that means you're already starting to disidentify with the negative thoughts, because the fact that you can observe your thoughts, the fact that you can observe the negative thinking shows you that you are not those thoughts. So you're creating the thoughts, or your mind is creating them. And I know that's going to sound like a strange concept because I'm saying you are creating the thoughts and I'm separating the mind, saying it's also creating the thoughts. But that's personally how I see it. And I believe that is how it really works. So when you start observing these thoughts and you realize, you start seeing more and more how you are not those thoughts, then you're beginning the process of disidentifying. So when you start doing that on a regular basis, when you catch yourself going, oh, I was really stuck in my thoughts and now I can observe them. And that is the beginning of disidentification, when you can really observe it and you can see yourself not being identified with the thoughts and you're not letting your mind and your thoughts run you. And then the third big issue about negative thoughts and the core problem with them is not being able to stop them from going around and around. So if you've done the first step, which is to become aware of when it's happening and the triggers, then you do the second step of being able to really observe the negative thinking and just watching it. So I can recommend, for example, just spending 5 minutes a day, just no distraction, just observing what you're thinking, what's going around, almost like it's listening to radio, for example. Once you've done those steps, it can be tempting to try to stop thoughts. And the thing about thoughts is that you cannot directly stop them, because in trying to stop them, you're probably going to create more thoughts. Let's say you have negative thoughts going around and you're observing them and you're noticing, oh, okay, yeah, this isn't me. It's not the total truth of me. It's my mind creating these thoughts for a reason. And we'll get into what those could be in a moment. So you're at the point of observing it. If you want to stop it, some people will try to just add more thoughts, which isn't going to work. It's just going to fuel them. So what people may do is try to add, let's say, thoughts to try and stop it, but that's just more negative thinking, going into negative thinking. So what you really want to do is to just learn to observe it and let it be. That is the most effective thing to do. It's almost like, imagine it being like a fire. The fire will eventually burn out. If you keep adding fuel to the fire, it will keep going. Or I like to compare, I did this in another video, to imagine there's water and there's lots of mud in it. If you keep trying to get the mud out, you're just creating more mud and making it go everywhere. But if you let it be, it will eventually settle. And that's the foundation of meditation and mindfulness practices. But what you can do is, while you're observing negative thoughts and you're letting it be, simply start creating more balanced, positive thoughts. So you're letting the negative thoughts be, but at the same time, you're bringing in the other perspective of a positive spin on a situation, because there's always going to be, in every moment, you can find negative things and also positive things, literally about any moment. As crazy as that might sound, I can highly recommend just trying it out. Look every moment, every time you have negative thoughts, try to see the positive as well. This way you're creating more positive thoughts and you're not fueling the negative thoughts. And by doing this more and more often and more frequently until it becomes a habit, you'll notice you have far less negative thoughts, and when you do, they're very temporary and they don't spiral out of control, and you'll automatically start looking at the other perspective, more positive perspective. So you can choose which perspective you want to fuel, whether you want to create more negative thoughts to fuel the negative perspective, or whether you want to think more balanced positive thoughts to fuel the positive perspective. Okay, so now that I've identified what the core issues are and ways that you can address this, we'll now come on to the 4 questions. Once you get into the practice of doing what I've just mentioned, there are really 4 questions that you can ask to very quickly go through this process. So number 1 is, when you start realizing, when you become aware that you're having negative thoughts, you ask yourself the question, who is creating these thoughts? So why is this important? This question is important because it immediately separates you from the thoughts. So you're asking who is creating these thoughts, or you could even say what is creating these thoughts. It reminds you in that moment, I am not the thoughts, they are being created, so they're coming from somewhere. And I find back in the past when I used to have this problem so severely, by asking this question, where is this coming from? Who is creating these thoughts? It reminds me of the 2 perspectives. There is me, and then there are the thoughts. So that immediately helps to disidentify you from the thoughts, so you can see them in a more objective way instead of believing that they are you. And then the second question you want to ask is this useful? And that might sound strange, but when we're having negative thoughts, I mean, even just neutral thoughts, either positive or negative, so many of our thoughts are just not useful. They're just random stuff that doesn't actually help with what you are doing in the moment or what you're even working towards. So after you've asked the question, who is creating these thoughts, or what is creating these thoughts, whichever you prefer, you then want to ask, is this useful? So if you notice your mind's going over catastrophic potential situations, or you notice it's just saying horrible things about yourself, just ask, is this useful? How is this going to help me in the moment? And I'm not saying that this will immediately stop negative thoughts. No, this is a process, and there are these different steps to go through and to practice every day. But the more you do this, you'll notice when you ask, is this useful? You'll probably start thinking about actually useful thoughts for what you're trying to do in that moment. Also, by asking, is this useful? You're immediately empowering yourself, because you're realizing how those negative thoughts are not really important. So when we place too much importance on thoughts, it's almost like we're giving them power. So by asking yourself, is this useful? You're immediately depowering those negative thoughts and realizing, oh yeah, like why am I fueling them? I don't need that. And so the third question to ask in order to stop negative thoughts is to ask, what are these thoughts saying that I need? And by need, I'm referring to your physical, emotional, and psychological needs. And so by looking at your thoughts, you may notice there's a general pattern in the themes of these thoughts. So you may notice, okay, these negative thoughts are generally negative about myself, or they're generally negative about the world or other people. So for example, if you're having negative thoughts about other people, and generally they're maybe, let's say, very judgmental, what is that really saying that you need? Well, it could be, for example, that you don't feel safe around people. Maybe on some level, this is because of past experiences with people. Now you have negative thinking about them. So really what that's indirectly saying is you need some kind of safe and meaningful relationships in your life. And you can imagine that once you actually create those relationships, it's unlikely you're going to have that negative thinking. Maybe to begin with, because you may not be used to it. But over time, because now that need has been met, you'll stop having those thoughts. Or for example, let's say there's negative thinking about the world around you or about yourself. You may notice that, okay, well, this is saying that I currently have a perspective that the world in some way isn't good. So that may make you feel terrible about yourself, for example. It may make you feel unsafe in the world. So then that's indirectly saying, well, I need to find ways to feel good about myself. I need to find ways to recognize the good in myself. Or it may say you need to find ways to feel safe in the world, or things that are good in the world. Because remember, both perspectives are going to exist at the same time. You can always find good and bad in everything. And that brings me to the fourth question to ask is, how can I meet this need? But really I should say it should be, how can I meet this need in a healthy way? And so once you've identified what need hasn't been met, so in the example of, let's say you're having negative thoughts about people, and let's say you don't feel safe around them, or if you're having negative thoughts about the world and you realize, okay, well, I don't feel safe in the world and I feel disconnected from it, then you have to think about ways that you can feel safer in the world. Maybe there's something you're doing without realizing that is making you feel unsafe, so you'll have to change that. Or maybe, for example, you realize it's your perspective on the world that needs to change. Either way, you meet the need by making a change either mentally or physically in the world. And so to summarize the 4 questions, the first question is, who is asking these thoughts? And then the second question to ask is this useful? And then the third question to ask is, what are these thoughts saying that I need? And the fourth question is, how can I meet this need in a healthy way? So what you'll find is, as you go through these practices, more and more, if you make this a daily practice, you start to disidentify with these thoughts. You stop giving them power, and it becomes much easier to see what triggers them, why they are there in the first place, what you need to do to meet the unmet need, and how you can meet that in a healthy way. So thanks for watching. If you found this video to be useful, click the like button, and to be notified of when I release the next video, hit the subscribe button just down there. And let me know what you think in the comments. Do you have other ways to deal with negative thoughts, or are you finding it difficult? And let me know with your progress to see how well you do with these questions. And I'll see you in the next video. Take care.